All right, so we're diving into international student visa overstays in the U.S. today. It's a fascinating topic, especially since the U.S. seems to be the only one out of all the big study destinations that actually publishes this data.
Yeah, the US is definitely more transparent in this regard than like the UK, Australia, or Canada.
Right, exactly. So it gives us a really interesting perspective, kind of lets us peek into trends and potential challenges that those other countries might also be facing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, even though they don't have the same public data available.
So this 2023 Homeland Security report, it estimates around 50,000 students overstayed their visas. That number alone could be a little, I don't know, alarming. But I mean, we have to dig deeper
Yeah,
yet.
for sure. There's a lot more to it. Not all overstays are the
Yeah,
same, right?
really, of course.
Some could be unintentional, maybe somebody just misunderstood some regulations or something unexpected happened. Others might be, well, more deliberate attempts to stay longer than they're allowed. But the report does highlight that India and China had the highest numbers, over 7,000 and 5,000, respectively.
Well, that makes sense. They have huge student populations here in the U.S., right?
Exactly, yeah. In the 2023-24 academic year, they accounted for 54% of all international enrollments. So those numbers might seem really high at first glance, but their actual rates of overstay are pretty low. It really shows how important it is to look beyond those headlines.
Absolutely, to see the full picture,
Yeah.
right? So what about the countries with the highest overstay rates? I know the article mentioned a few that were pretty surprising.
Oh, yeah, for sure. This is where it gets interesting. Equatorial Guinea, for example, has an overstay rate of over 70%. It's actually like 70.18%.
Wow.
Yeah. And other countries like Chad, Eritrea, and Congo are all above 50%.
That's huge. So what's going on there? Are there specific things happening in those countries that might be driving those numbers up?
That's the big question, isn't it? Are there like unique economic or political situations that are playing a role? I'd love to know more, dig a little deeper into that. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. There's got to be more to it than just the numbers themselves. Now, the article also mentioned different types of overstay rates, and to be honest, it got a little confusing. Could you maybe clarify that a bit?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So you've got the in-country overstay rate, which that refers to the people who are thought to still be here in the U.S., even though their visas expired.
Okay.
And then there's the total overstay rate, and that includes those still in the country and those who may have left after overstaying but weren't recorded leaving.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so that one might be a bit inflated.
Because some students might have left but just weren't tracked properly.
Exactly. It could be because of how they left, like maybe by land.
Right.
It can be hard to track those departures sometimes. So yeah, the data might have some limitations.
Which kind of leads us to the whole debate about the reliability of the data itself, right?
Right.
Something the article talked about quite a bit.
Exactly. You have people like Jessica Vaughn. She's a strong advocate for stricter immigration controls, and she uses these numbers to support her argument.
Right.
But then on the other hand, you have organizations like NAFSA, which represents international educators, and they say, hold on, this data isn't totally reliable. It might actually be exaggerating the problem. They're concerned about undercounting, like those who changed their visa status or left without being properly recorded. It seems like everyone agrees we need better data collection, more accurate, more robust. That's really the only way to have an informed debate about this whole thing.
Absolutely. So, I mean, how do we reconcile those viewpoints? Especially when we're not even sure about the data itself.
Well, it's tricky, for sure. We have to remember that there are a lot of reasons why someone might overstay. It's not always a malicious thing. Sometimes it's an honest mistake. Someone didn't quite understand the regulations, or maybe something came up, unexpected circumstances that delayed their departure.
Sure.
But then, of course, there are cases where someone might be trying to, well, take advantage of the system. But trying to simplify this whole issue down to just numbers, well, that can be misleading and ultimately unproductive.
Yeah, you lose the human element, right? Those individual stories.
Exactly. It's more complex than that.
So let's move on to policy implications. I mean, this is a hot button issue, right? And the article mentioned some pretty strong recommendations from that Jessica Vaughn we were talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah. She's advocating for some big changes,
Yeah.
including eliminating OPT, the optional practical training program.
Right, which, by the way, lets international students work here after they graduate.
Exactly. And she also wants stricter rules for H-1B visas, those specialty occupation visas that many international students use to stay and work here long term.
Yeah. But one thing that really stood out to me was her statement about dual intent not applying to student visa applicants.
Oh, right, yeah.
Didn't the article mention that that's already the case under current law?
Yeah, you're right. Right now, dual intent doesn't apply, which means they're not penalized for, maybe wanting to stay in the U.S. after they finish their studies. It seems like her statement might be based on a misunderstanding of how things actually work right now.
Wow, so there's a disconnect there.
Yeah,
Makes you wonder if some of these proposed changes are really addressing the real problems.
definitely raises some questions. I mean, we need to be cautious about making big decisions and implementing big changes without really understanding the current situation.
For sure, and thinking about those unintended consequences. What do you think about how all this could impact how attractive the U.S. is to international students, especially since a lot of them choose where to study based on the chance of working here afterwards?
Yeah, NAFSA argues that stricter measures could make the U.S. a lot less appealing. Students might choose other countries that are, maybe more welcoming, have clearer pathways to work, and even stay permanently after graduation. We also need to think about the economic impact.
Yeah, definitely.
International students bring a lot of money into the U.S. economy, not only through their tuition, but also by, just living here, spending money in their communities, and some of them might even end up starting businesses.
That's a ripple effect, right? It goes way beyond just the universities themselves.
Exactly, yeah. Restricting their access could really hurt the U.S. in the long run. We could lose our position as this global hub for higher education and our ability to attract the best and brightest from around the world. That could definitely take a hit.
So it's a balance, right?
A delicate balance, for sure.
Yeah.
We need to address legitimate concerns about overstays, that's for sure. But we also have to be careful about those unintended consequences. We don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, it does feel like we're walking a tightrope,
Right.
trying to make sure the system is secure, but also making sure we're not shutting the door on all these students.
Right, yeah, exactly. And we also can't forget about the economic impact. International students, they bring billions of dollars to the U.S. economy. And not just through tuition, but also through, living expenses and stuff like that, travel, all that.
And speaking of that economic impact,
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting that this whole debate about overstays is happening at the same time that we're seeing these short-term study abroad programs becoming so popular. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like micro-credentials, semester exchanges, those summer programs.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Those shorter programs are definitely becoming more and more popular, especially for students who maybe don't have the time or the money to, do a full degree abroad. It's a way to experience a new culture, learn specific skills, and even, make their resumes look better, all in a shorter amount of time.
Right, exactly.
Hmm.
It's like a taste test almost.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But does this trend make the whole visa situation even more complicated?
Well, it definitely adds another layer, that's for sure. A lot of those short-term programs, they fall under different visa categories, and each one has its own rules and regulations. It can be a real pain for universities and students to figure out, honestly.
Yeah, that's true. So should someone who's, let's say, coming for a 2-week language program have to go through the same level of scrutiny as someone who's going to be here for a PhD program for years?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It really shows how we need a visa system that's more flexible, more adaptable, I guess, one that takes into account all the different types of educational experiences students are looking for nowadays. Maybe this one-size-fits-all approach isn't the best way to handle student mobility anymore. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it really feels like we're at a crossroads. We need to balance those legitimate security concerns with the huge benefits that international students bring, not just to our campuses, but to our entire society.
I totally agree with that. It's all about finding that balance, where we can encourage that global collaboration and exchange, without compromising national security. And to do that, we need policies that are, well, effective and humane and based on real data.
Now, the article also talked about the role of universities in all of this. Some policymakers are saying that there should be stricter penalties for schools that have high overstay rates among their international students. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's definitely controversial. Some people say that that institutions have a responsibility to make sure that their international students are, maintaining their legal status. And they argue that if there were penalties for overstays, well, that could encourage schools to do a better job with compliance and all that.
But wouldn't that create a climate of, I don't know, fear and mistrust? Could it discourage universities from even accepting international students in the first place?
Yeah, I see your point. That's the argument from the other side. I mean, universities are already under a lot of pressure, right?
Oh, absolutely.
They have to provide support for students. They have to manage all these complicated academic programs. And on top of that, they're trying to keep up with how quickly higher education is changing these days. So adding more rules and regulations, especially with the threat of penalties, that could be a huge burden.
And at the end of the day, isn't it really the student's responsibility to, make sure they're following all the visa rules?
Yeah, that's right. Schools can provide information and guidance and all that, but they can't force students to comply. There have to be clear boundaries when it comes to responsibility.
So maybe it's more about collaboration, a partnership between like the government agencies, the universities, and the students themselves. A system where everybody's on the same page, there's clear communication, and everyone takes responsibility for their part. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're right. That collaborative approach is key. Instead of like this us versus them mentality, recognizing that we all have a stake in making sure the system works and that it's fair for everybody.
Right. And speaking of fairness, we haven't even touched on the impact of all this on the students themselves. They're often stuck in the middle of this debate, right? They're facing all this scrutiny and there's all this uncertainty about their future. What kind of impact do you think that has on them?
It's a huge concern for sure. All this talk about immigration, especially when it's so politically charged, it can create this hostile environment for international students. They might not feel welcome. They might be anxious about their legal status. And some might even be afraid of being discriminated against or harassed.
Heartbreaking to think about.
It really is. I mean, these students come here with hopes and dreams. They want to get a good education and build a better future for themselves, and then they're met with suspicion. We have to remember that they bring so much to our communities.
I agree. We have to see them as individuals, recognize their humanity, and see the value they bring. Instead of looking at them like they're a threat, we should be celebrating their diversity, their resilience, their commitment to being here and engaging with the world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So with all this back and forth, all this debate, how do we make sure that the information that's out there is accurate and unbiased? Because the way we talk about these issues, it really matters, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It shapes how the public sees these things, and that influences policy decisions. We have to move beyond those attention-grabbing headlines, the ones that try to scare people. What we need is to really base our understanding on facts and data and analysis, and to be really careful about the language we use.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of just focusing on those overstay rates, we should be highlighting the positive things international students bring to the U.S. Their impact on our economy, our workforce, our society as a whole.
It's about telling the whole story, right?
Exactly. Not just picking and choosing data to fit a certain narrative. We need to remember that international students, they're not all the same. They come from so many different places, with so many different reasons for being here, so many different hopes and dreams.
Right. And international education, it's not just a one-way street either.
Right. It's not just about what international students get out of studying in the U.S.
Yeah. American students, faculty, entire communities, they all benefit so much from interacting with people from all over the world.
It's this reciprocal relationship where both sides benefit. It helps people see the bigger picture. It encourages cross-cultural understanding. It prepares all of us for a world that's becoming more and more globalized every day. And in today's world, those skills, those experiences, they're so important.
So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Right.
what are the most important things you think we should take away from all this?
Well, we've looked at all the ins and outs of visa overstays, the debate about how reliable the data actually is and what could happen if policies change. And we've also talked about the role of the universities, the impact on the students themselves, and why it's so important to make sure the information out there is accurate and unbiased.
Yeah, it's been a really thorough look at a very complicated issue. But with all these numbers and policies and everything, we can't lose sight of the people at the heart of it all.
Yeah.
These are real people with real lives, real hopes and dreams. And the decisions we make as a society, they have a real impact on their lives.
Exactly. So going forward, we need to approach this issue with empathy and understanding. And we need to commit to finding solutions that really work, solutions that are humane, solutions that uphold our values of fairness, opportunity, and global engagement.
It strikes me that this all comes down to one fundamental question. What do we as a country, what do we want our relationship with international students to look like?
Yeah, that's a big one.
It seems simple on the surface, but the answer, well, that has huge implications,
Oh,
right?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the decisions we're making now, they're going to have a ripple effect, not just in higher education, but for the US's place in the world, you know?
Right, exactly. So do we want to be seen as a welcoming place, a place that attracts talented people from everywhere? Or do we want to put up barriers, project this image of, like, suspicion, you know?
Yeah, it's a choice, isn't it? And it really reflects what we value, what our priorities are. If we choose to be open, to collaborate, well, the benefits are pretty clear. More innovation, economic growth, cultural enrichment, a more interconnected world, all that.
But if we choose to isolate ourselves, to be driven by fear, well, we risk losing all of that. We could become, insular, stagnant. We could fall behind other countries when it comes to attracting talent and new ideas.
And we also have to consider the moral side of things. Turning our backs on international students, that sends a message that doesn't exactly align with our ideals, right?
Sure.
Freedom, opportunity, the pursuit of knowledge, all that.
Yeah, it kind of suggests we're not that country anymore. The country that's always welcomed people from all over the world feels like, I don't know, a really crucial moment for us.
It is. It really is. So the question becomes, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
How do we change the narrative? Create an environment that's truly welcoming for these students.
Well, education seems like a good place to start. We have to educate ourselves and others about how complicated immigration really is, about what visa overstays actually look like and the huge contributions that these students make.
I agree, yeah. We have to get rid of those harmful myths, challenge those stereotypes, and just promote a better understanding of what's really going on. It's not about silencing people who disagree. It's about creating a space where we can have real conversations, respectful conversations, conversations based on facts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we need to hold our leaders accountable, push them to support policies that are actually effective and humane.
Yeah.
Policies that recognize those security concerns, but also make sure we're not shutting the door on all this global collaboration and exchange. What do you think individuals can do, everyday people, to make a difference?
Well, speaking out against discrimination, against prejudice, that's huge. We have to be allies to these students. We have to show them that they're valued, that they belong here. Supporting organizations that fight for their rights, that help them when they're struggling, that can make a real difference too.
Yeah, it's a call to action for all of us, right?
Yeah, it is.
We have to remember that we're all connected, that we're all human, and that education, it has the power to bring people together, to bridge those divides and build a better future.
It's about embracing all those differences, creating a world where everyone, no matter where they're from, no matter their background, everyone has the chance to follow their dreams.
Well, this has been a truly insightful deep dive. As we wrap up, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I'd say the future of international education in the U.S., it's at a crossroads. The choices we make as individuals, as universities, as a country, they're going to determine whether we stay this global destination, this magnet for talent and innovation, or whether we turn inward. The stakes are high, and we need to act now, and we need to act with knowledge.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on this issue, on the complexities of these visa overstays, and that it's encouraged you to think critically about the choices we face as a country. Thanks for joining us.